backwards. Okay.
I know.
All right. Good evening, everybody. Welcome to the HWA's live panel. This is part of the Horror Writers Association's Halloween in July series of panels and broadcasts. And it's a fundraiser for the HWA's many scholarships. I'm Vince Lagano. I'm one of the editors of Other Terrors, an inclusive anthology, which was the HWA's most recent anthology. Unfortunately, my lovely co-editor, Rena Mason, is unable to join us, so I'm going solo this evening, so forgive me. With me, I have a great panel of contributors to Other Terrors. We have Maxwell Ian Gold, we have Anne Davila Cardinal, Annie Neugebauer, Jonathan Lees, and the incomparable Michael Thomas Ford. And there's no center square, so nobody's doing Paul Lynn. So, Mike, are you going to do the Paul Lynn square for us tonight?
I'll try. Taffeta.
So we actually have the interesting time slot of doing this on the actual 1-year anniversary of the release, which side am I on, of Other Terrors.
Yay.
So 1 year ago today, William Morrow unleashed our little anthology upon the world. We're, I think as a group, safely to say we are all very proud of the anthology. Starred reviews in Publishers Weekly, Booklist, and the notorious Kirkus. And most recently, it was nominated for the prestigious Shirley Jackson Award. Alas, we did not win. But we did get the rock. Where's the rock? I will show the rock. We have the rock. There is the rock.
That counts.
So, I wanted to start with a question for Anne and Mike. You were two of the several invited contributors to the anthology. So what was that like getting the invitation call from us, and how did you come up with your story for Other Terrors?
Mike, you want to go first?
Sure. It's always nice to be invited to things, especially 30 years into a career. I'm slightly unusual in that I'm not really known for any one thing because I write in a bunch of different genres. So I'm kind of always surprised when people invite me to things because I sometimes feel like I'm not known for anything. So it was wonderful to get this. As for the idea, most of my short fiction starts with an image of some kind. And I had this image of this man standing at a urinal in a very rundown bar. And as he's peeing, he's looking at a centerfold from Playboy magazine. And so I was wondering, well, why is he there? Why is that there? And why is he in this bar? And it just went from there to, I knew it was a story about a man returning to the town he had grown up in, which was very much the town I grew up in. And then I was asking myself why he was there. I don't know how much you want us to get into what our stories are about, but that's how it started.
Well, I just want to know why Max and Jonathan immediately started smiling when you talked about a man standing at a urinal. I don't know. I'm just throwing it out there, people.
Wow. Jesus Christ. I think my mom's watching, please.
Sorry, Mom. And how about your story? How did your story come about?
My story is Invasive Species. And when I got invited, I thought it was a mistake. But, I mean, I'm a novelist, and I tend to write my published horror has been primarily for teens. And then you see the names of the other people invited, and I'm like, oh my God. So I was very honored. And I had just come back from Puerto Rico, where my family's from. And my cousin, Tere, lived in Old San Juan. And I remember her, there's this, this two sides to this story where, yes, a lot of the properties were being bought up by development companies and by people from the States. And that was frustrating because it was taking it out of the hands of Puerto Rican people. On the other hand, these were buildings that were largely abandoned. And so, you want them to look nice. And so it was this sort of like up and down. But then I started thinking about, it is a culture of the colonized, in the sense that it was always colonized by somebody, and it is the longest lasting colony. So you start to look at what is the invasive species. And that's where it sort of began.
Now, did either of you, the stories that you wound up submitting, were those the original thoughts, or were there any story ideas that you scrapped?
It was my original.
Mike?
Yeah, mine was. Once I started writing the character and knew who he was and why he was where he was, it came pretty quickly.
Okay. Now let's flip it around. So Max, Jonathan, and Annie, you responded to the open call. So I'm curious. One, my first question, what was it about the open call that drew you to the anthology? Who wants to go first? We'll let ladies go first. Annie?
Sure. I mean, I saw it on the HWAs, I think on the Facebook page originally, and I was just immediately, anytime there's a submission call from HWA, I'm interested in getting involved. So my story was actually kind of telling on myself, but I had written it for a different anthology that got delayed because of the pandemic.
Oh.
And so I had written it and I loved it. And so then I just looked and I was like, I really think that fits in a sort of unusual way. I think that fits the prompt. So I decided to take the gamble and see if you guys agreed. And it worked out. And it worked out with the other anthology too. I sent them a different story. So it worked out for me this time, but I just got lucky that a story that I happened to have recently finished and had on hold was available that fit.
I'm making a note. Annie sent us a trunk story.
No, it was, you guys were actually the first place I sent it because I had written it for an anthology that got put on hold. So it had never been sent anywhere. You guys were first.
Well, it is funny because, as everybody knows, Rena and I, these submissions were blind. So it was funny. We got to, I want to say, somewhere in the 50s, we had about 5 or 6 subsequent submissions that you could tell were all from the same science fiction anthology that had clearly not made it into the anthology, and people just sent them in because it was like the same exact theme, and we were just having such a laugh over that.
Yeah. Well, the theme that I almost never write stories to submission calls because, especially if they're very specific, because then if they don't want it, I have a really specific story, like those ones you got in a row.
Right.
So it was a story that I wanted to write anyway. It was from my actual experience that summer, it was taken very much from experiences. So it was one I wanted to write, and the other anthology was not heavily themed. It was sort of a broad theme. So it happened to work out. And then I happened to have a different story that I was, able to do for that one. But I wasn't really sure if you guys were even going to, when I sent it in, I was thinking, well, I think it fits, but I don't know if they're going to think it fits the prompt. So I was happy that you guys saw that too.
We didn't. Oh, it was a creepy story.
It
was a creepy story. That was some crazy pool going on there. Wow. Jonathan, how about you?
I think the prompt allowed me to tell a story I was probably at the time uncomfortable telling. And it kind of pushed me in a way that I wanted to do with my fiction, because parts of me are in every story I write, but this one I really wanted to dive deep into something, character caught in a riptide, or as we incorrectly called them, an undertow of life, where you're just sucked into all these bad situations and spit out. You're always around these people that drag you into those positions, and you can never really be yourself. So I wanted to explore that and treat it sort of like my own nervous, paranoid energy, with more conflict than dialogue happening and no distinction between delusion, dream, or waking life. And so it really was about getting it right. The first iteration of the story was eviscerated, as it should have been. It was a hellscape. And then I rewrote it 3 more times, and when I sent it in, I felt good. When I first saw the call, I was like, oh, Jesus, I don't have a chance. But that's, the usual self-doubt and bullshit we put ourselves through. But when I got the acceptance, I mean, my partner can probably tell you that I screamed. It was a scream of joy, not my usual scream.
And it's a beautifully written story. I remember distinctly falling in love with the language in that story.
I appreciate it, Vince. Or as my favorite Goodreads reviewer said, this is so beautifully written, but I have no idea what's happening.
It's all good. It worked.
That's fine.
Not in the book. Max.
I think for me, the feelings were, as Annie and Jonathan have said, similar. You see the open call and it's very intimidating. You're just, and everyone has that imposter syndrome, and it's just like, oh no. But I think at the time when the open call came out, I think it was 2020, 2021, 2021. Anyway, my time's all blurred. Anyway, I think the story that I wrote, which I originally kind of I drafted it actually as a prose poem, no surprise. And it kind of allowed me to explore some feelings and fears of the world, being queer and Jewish, just and in a more cosmic and dreadful way. And I was just kind of like, oh, is this going to be too sticky, like this whole thing. And so I think I was happy that obviously that it worked. And so and I was nervous because I wrote something so short, because I think mine was only like 1,600 words or somewhere. It was really short for for a short story.
See, luckily one of your editors was not a size queen, and it worked out okay for you, Max. It's all good. See, we're going to gay this panel up tonight, people. I'm telling you, we're just going to do it. Okay. What advice would, especially Max and Jonathan, Annie, what advice would you give to any of the HWA members, especially some of the newer members, some of the affiliate members who are maybe watching tonight and thinking, when that next anthology call comes out, I'm not ready to submit to this. I'm not going to submit to this. I'll never get into this. What would you say to that kind of person and that kind of mindset? Max, why don't we start with you?
I would say ignore that voice and just go ahead and ignore that voice and go ahead and write, what you think fits the call and submit it. Because if I didn't ignore that and I didn't submit, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be here today. So I would say just ignore that little imposter voice and write that story. Oh, and be patient.
Yeah, it took us a hot minute, didn't it?
Yeah. And that's just in general, but just definitely be patient.
Jonathan, how about you?
Oh, I would say definitely. First of all, read the guidelines. I almost swore. I don't know if we can swear here, but I sympathize with editors. Like if there's a direct reason for the anthology and what you're looking for is clearly stated, please read those guidelines. Then you can tell the story you want within those guidelines. But I really do feel for some editors. No wonder they call it the slush pile.
Yeah.
Yep. I just finished, as you guys know, the 3rd volume of Unspeakable Horror. And every time I have put out a submissions call, I have literally explicitly said, please, no stories about man-hating lesbians who chop off men's unmentionables. And every single time I get at least a dozen stories about lesbians angry chopping off men's unmentionables. It drives me crazy. They don't read. Don't read.
There is a place for that.
Yeah, spoil sport.
Not in my anthologies. Sorry. And I don't think there's going to be a place in any HWA anthologies for that either. I don't think, but you never know. Annie, how about you? What advice would you give to the HWA members watching?
Well, I definitely agree with both of those. I mean, if you don't try, you can't get in. The worst that can happen is that you get a no, and we get those all the time. It's not a big deal. I would also say send in something you truly love personally. Mm-hmm. I felt like mine was a gamble. I didn't know if other people would get it or not, but I knew at the end of the day it was something I loved and that I was proud of. And with a theme like this, I also think it helps to see if you can find an angle that might be less used. I assume you guys got lots and lots of submissions from some of the more common, expected angles. And I sent in something that was a less come to the top of your head angle. So I think that probably gave me a little bit of an advantage as far as my story went.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. So
it was interesting because Max was talking about imposter syndrome. And I don't know if anybody saw it today, but Gabino Iglesias, who just won the Bram Stoker Award for the Best Superior Achievement in Novel, who just won the Shirley Jackson Award for a novel, was talking today about being like crippled with imposter syndrome today. So, you know, it's a real thing. We all experience it, no matter what level of writing, no matter how many years you've done it. So, you know, be kind to yourselves, I guess. All right, so time to spread some love. I want everyone to talk a little bit about your favorite story. I'm assuming everybody read Other Terrors. If you didn't, you're gonna have to bluff. But I was hoping that you would share with us, maybe starting with Anne, what was your favorite story from the anthology and why?
It was hard to pick. You know, there was a lot I enjoyed, but I have to say, Misinfection USA.
Oh, Shanna. Okay.
Shanna Heath. There was a social sort of commentary, particularly as women expected to look a certain way, and just the whole concept of it, and the I don't know, I just really enjoyed it, and I found it incredibly memorable. I hadn't read anything like that before, and it was sick. And I'm not a body horror person. It tends to like really sort of get to me, but boy, I love that one.
It would make a great episode on the one of the anthology series like Creep Show or something.
Absolutely.
That are out, right? Wouldn't that be a fun one?
Absolutely.
Mike, how about you?
Well, it's funny when you asked that question. It's been a long time since I read the stories, and long COVID has done a number on my memory. So I don't barely remember what day it is or what my name is. But I immediately thought of the Amakatsu story. And that one has stuck in my head. It's the kind of story I like in general. It's weird and it's lovely at the same time.
Yeah. And
it's sort of quiet in a lot of ways. And that's the kind of thing I enjoy, where they're just very unsettling. So,
yeah, I'll share with you, and I hope I'm not speaking out of turn, Alma. If I am, I'm sorry. But when Alma submitted that, she was one of our invited authors, and she really struggled with self-doubt that it nailed the theme. And Rena and I were both like, no, this is like perfect. You know, you can be othered in your own family, you know, as her characters were. It's a great story. Jonathan, how about you? What was your favorite story from Other Terrors, or the one that stuck with you the most?
Present Company Excluded, and I mean, I loved a lot of them, from Stephen Graham Jones, Haley Piper, but I want to call out Linda Addison, who's a genius, and Resident Queen, Those Hungry to Revise History, Caged Children, Stand on the Throat of Another When No Tree is Found. I mean, I could feel that come through the page, and I know she meant it. And it was probably the most direct, literal translation of the theme, but in her words, and I love it. But on a totally flip note, I love things that are about dread and isolation, heavy drama. It's what I'm drawn to, but I appreciated the total B-movie explosion that's What Blood Hath Wrought by S.A. Cosby. Oh my God. Yeah, it just felt like the best B-movie short that hasn't been made. It's, you know, an elimination piece. Which character is going to get it? And man, it's sticky.
Yeah.
It was fun.
Rena and I were so blown away by that story because we didn't know what to expect. First, we were shocked that he said yes. And we really wanted to kind of reach outside the traditional horror box, you know, kind of that whole shades and variations on genre. And, you know, having read the first two books, we were both kind of like, you know what, let's see what he could do with this. And we had no idea what he was going to submit. And when it came in, we were just like, wow, this is good. And it was real straight up another one that would make a great episode in an anthology kind of series for sure.
Absolutely. Yes.
Cool. Annie, how about you? What was your favorite, or which one stuck with you the most?
So there were lots that kind of stuck in my mind later. I loved Stephen Graham Jones. That was so fun. But I think probably the one, well, I would say Idiot Girls really like made me feel in a powerful way. And I was so surprised where that went. It caught me off guard. So it really sucked me in. And then it really gave me like satisfying twist. So that was a favorite. And I also really, really loved Incident at Bear Creek Lodge. I don't know if
Yeah.
I mangled that title, but that one was also incredible.
Yeah.
Insanely
After we read that and accepted it, Rena and I were both begging Tananarive to make that into a novel. I mean, that could just be expanded so beautifully, that whole narrative. Funny story, I'll tell you an anecdote about the Stephen Graham Jones story. So Stephen is a good friend of mine. He's been in three of my five anthologies. So of course I asked him to be in this one. And he was just like, I think he had just finished My Heart as a Chainsaw. And he's like, man, I'm all slashed out. And he's like, I don't really think I can do anything. I was like, I'm hanging my head. Okay, Stephen, I guess I'll be disappointed. And I moved on. Within like 2 hours, I get an email. Man, I just came up with this story. Hold on. 2 hours later, I had Tiddlywinks.
That's not fair.
I know.
But that's Stephen. I was just like, this is awesome. So I was so happy. He came through for me.
Nice.
Max, how about you? What was your favorite other terror?
Well, Jonathan took mine. So
Jonathan.
I was gonna because I wanted to highlight some of the poetry. So I was going to talk about Linda's because yes, I really love the language and the poetics that she used to capture, the dreadfulness and the cosmic dreadfulness of being other. But particularly what I loved about the poem was it was a concrete poem. So I loved how the structure, it's the illusions of the de-evolved. So it's starting. So it's where my camera is. So it's starting. It's starting like in a column. So it's going down as if it's going to reach a point and burgeoning to a point, and then it gets back to where it started. So like I loved the image that she created in that poem. So it really kind of highlighted, the illusions of the de-evolved. So it was a really wonderful concrete poem.
Yeah, I love the physical presentation of that poem too, and we actually had to really work hard with William Morrow to put it in that way, because that kind of formatting, I guess, for publishers can be a nightmare. And they were like, oh, I don't know. We're like, we have to. It's got to, it just works this way. Please, please, please. And they did. They were awesome about it. This is an unscripted question. It just popped in my mind. But do you all think that there's enough potential for an Other Terrors too? Is that something you could see happening? Or do you
Hell
think?
yeah.
So you don't think we've exhausted the theme?
Absolutely not.
No.
Okay.
No.
Are you listening, everybody? Alex Shane, are you listening? John Edward Lawson, are you listening? William Morrow, are you listening? I'm shameless. I'm going to plug it. I think we should do a sequel.
Only if you call it other terrors, though.
Yeah.
Other terrors.
Other terrors too. The other ones. Yeah.
Other terrors too. The other ones. Oh, we could do this all night. This would be great. my only caveat to that we'd have to get the same cover art. Camacho, but do like the same cover, but do a totally different color scheme, like green and yellow or something, and just.
Oh, get the artist to do something complimentary. You love the way I'm spending their money?
Hey, not my money either, so spend it, honey. Go for it. But this was I don't know if anybody knows this, but Camacho did the I think both covers for the Marlon James books. Yep. So it's got a real I think it really stood out on shelves, I think, which was nice.
Absolutely.
Vince, would you like to tell everyone, if they the next 50 donations? For everyone.
Why don't you do it, Executive Director? Fundraising Supreme.
Well, for the next 50 donations of $45 or more, everyone will get a free copy of Other Terrors, generously provided by William Morrow, as you can see behind me.
The cachet.
Free copy for $45, people. It's a steal.
Is there a link?
And you're helping the scholarship fund. Max, talk about the scholarships a little bit.
Yeah, all donations raised throughout this campaign will go to support all the HWA scholarship programs. There are 8 scholarship programs from Scholarship from Hell, the diversity grants, the Mary Wollstonecraft Scholarship. So everything raised tonight and until the end of August will go to benefit all of those programs. So, so the next 50 donations of $45 or more, we'll get a free copy. I keep pointing the other way. We'll get a free copy of Other Terrors. So
I'll do Vanna duties.
And yes, the $45 is also tax deductible. Thank you, Brian. So that is completely tax deductible. So
donate, people. We're not
Brian
doing it for our health. Come on.
Hi, Brian Matthews.
Oh, we have somebody watching us actually live. How do we see how many people are watching us live?
Denise is in the chat.
Hey,
Brian,
Denise. Oh, that's nice. All right, so let's talk a little bit about, going back to our script, let's talk a little bit about what each of you are working on now. Annie, what's going on with you?
So I'm always kind of off and on doing short stories and poetry, but I just finished a novel draft that I sent to my agent. My agent is actually Alex Shane. He's my personal
awesome.
agent. So yeah, so that was pretty cool. That's fun for me.
So
Yeah.
when you send your novel in, you're going to say, P.S. Other Terrors too, right?
I'm sure it's on his radar.
Okay.
Yeah, so I just sent that to him, and I'm always sort of back burnering different story ideas, and waiting to see which one's going to grab my attention too. So
Any anthology calls you're really excited about?
Well, I don't know if I'm allowed to say that. Never mind. I'm always looking through all the open calls I can find. So I have, my own little stockpile of stories that I go through every once in a while and reread and see if they want a shine and see if they fit anything that I find for open calls and all that kind of stuff. So.
Nice. Well, good luck with that novel submission.
Thank you.
Fingers crossed for you.
Thanks.
Jonathan, what are you working on?
I'm actually working on 2 short stories now and hopefully a longer piece for the end of the year. But like Gabino, I'm going through my own syndrome and trying to get that out of my head so I can move on. But I would love to call attention to some of the pieces I published last year. Go support independent presses as well. The Hideous Book of Hidden Horrors from Bad Hand Books. Carl Mad 5 from Michael Bailey, written backwards, and Even in the Grave from James Chambers and Carol Sander. And yeah, that's it.
And Doug Morano's anthology and Michael Bailey's were with us in the category for best edited anthology in the Shirley Jackson. So we were in very good company. And of course, Doug's anthology won. So yay to Doug. That was awesome. Max, what are you working on right now?
I have I had 2 poetry collections to come out. Well, Bleeding Rainbows was just released in June, and then I have a chapbook of queer myths, or called another like seeing it this one, another mythology that's coming out in September.
Both great covers, by the way. Great covers.
Oh, thank you. Dan Sauer did another mythology. He's wonderful. He does work for Hippocampus Press. He's fantastic. He did Oblivion and Flux in 2021. There was a Dutch artist named Martini that he did the cover for Bleeding Rainbows as well. And then just a few poetry things here and there. I'll have a poem and working on a poem for a William Hope Hodgson anthology that's for next year. And then another poetry collection. So just a bunch of poetry.
You're being modest. You have a poetry acceptance every other day. You are so prolific in such a short period of time. You're a hardworking guy. Excellent job. Good for you, Max. Anne, what are you working on?
Well, Breakup from Hell is a YA horror rom-com that came out in January, and I'm working on the second one for Harper Teen. All I can say, let Cthulhu in the Hamptons.
Oh.
And
was that the log line you used to sell that? That's good.
Actually, I wanted to call it Cthulhu Summer Vacation, but they thought with teens that would be a little hard. So, but the interesting thing about that is it has an ace main character, and I didn't think they let me do that. You know, they're always pushing for romance in YA, but they were game. So, and I'm also I'm working on a story for an anthology called Combat Monsters by Henry Hers, and it's like all World War II battles with monsters, if there were monsters involved. So I'm doing El Cuco.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. So, and then I'm also working on a scripted podcast. I'm really liking that form, to be able to tell stories completely with sound.
Oh.
It's like a writing exercise on steroids. So
I
I'm
like
really
that.
enjoying it.
That's awesome. Not to change the subject, but now I know you are from Vermont.
Yes.
How did you fare with all the catastrophic flooding?
Shockingly well. We're in Morrisville, north of Stowe, so we're actually pretty high in terms
Okay.
of elevation. Montpelier was decimated. You know, I
Wow.
probably saw the footage. So it's a little hard, particularly the bookstore there and seeing them sort of dig out. But we had very little deaths in terms of this,
Thank God.
very few. And
Yeah.
so, you know,
Well,
but we fared well. Thank you for
we're
asking.
glad you're safe.
Thank you.
Mr. Ford, what are you working on right now?
Well, I work primarily in middle grade and YA at the moment, and I have a couple of fun things coming out. One is another story in an anthology, which was also a surprise to have happen. It's a YA anthology that Rob Costello has edited, and I think they just changed the title to They Mostly Come Out at Night or something like that. But he wanted us to pick well-known monsters and turn them into queer icons.
Oh,
And because I live in Appalachia, I of course had to do Mothman, who is my favorite. And so I think it's a fun story about a teenager who's coming to terms with his own sexuality, and Mothman helps him out. And it's also about the opioid crisis in Appalachia and generational trauma, because everything I write is really happy. And so that's going to be a lot of fun. So I don't know when that comes out, sometime in the spring. And then the next thing out is I have props. HarperCollins sent me a fake version of my new novel, which is called Every Star That Falls.
oh, very cool.
And
We like props.
this is not real. Inside this is a book called Franny and True. I don't know what that is. Anyway, they sent me this because Books A Million asked me to do a TikTok-y thing for them, and I needed a copy of my book, so they made a fake one.
I love
was
that.
great.
Yeah, it is fun. So that comes out in the fall, and weirdly, this is a sequel to a book I wrote 15 years ago, and this is sort of an interesting object lesson for HWA members or anybody watching this who may wonder what happens to somebody's career. 15 years ago, I wrote a YA novel called Suicide Notes, which was a funny novel about suicide because it's kind of on brand for me. And it was a little early for that sort of thing, and it didn't do terribly well. But a couple of years ago, somebody at Barnes & Noble fell in love with it. And they asked Harper to release it as a paperback, which they had never done. And it's become my best-selling book ever in the last 2 or 3 years because of Barnes & Noble putting it into this program they did where they stuck it out on the tables. So I was working on my next novel for Harper, and my editor called one day and she said, "What would you think about stopping working on that and writing a sequel to Suicide Notes?" And I had always said that I would never write a sequel to Suicide Notes because I wanted readers to leave the character where he was. It's about a boy who ends up in a psychiatric ward after a suicide attempt, again, very cheery, and it ends on the day he gets out. And so no matter what you do with a sequel, people will be disappointed, whichever way you go. So I always said, I'm not doing one. She said, would you reconsider? So I did. Barnes & Noble can make you change your mind about things sometimes. And so that's it. And so this is the sequel. And it's interesting because, like Anne, you said that Harper is letting you have an ace character in your book. Mine has what I think is going to be the first YA polyamorous triad. And when
Bold.
when I first pitched it
Wow.
to my editor, I thought she's going to write me right back and say, "Are you out of your mind?" And she wrote back and
That's awesome.
she said, "Okay, give it a shot, but I may make you take it out." And they loved it.
Awesome.
Amen.
Impressive.
I don't know what readers are going to think about these characters, but
I think it's going to be banned, Mike, but I'm just scared.
it probably will. It's funny. Everything after 30 years, everything comes full circle. I was banned with my first. I wrote the very first book about HIV and AIDS for teenagers, and it got banned everywhere because we talked about anal sex, and we talked about how to wear condoms, and we talked about how to shoot drugs as safely as you possibly can. And I got hate mail, and we didn't even have the internet back then, and I got hate mail.
Wow.
That's when people were really committed to their hate mail, Mike.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I really meant it.
It's funny. The very first piece of reader mail I ever got, when I wrote my first novel, I started out writing nonfiction. So when I wrote my first novel, I was so pleased with myself, and the very first physical letter I got was, "This is the worst book
Oh.
ever read in my entire life. This is just horrible."
Did you frame it?
I was just going to ask that.
I should have.
Well,
Hi, Sue.
I for one am very happy that Suicide Notes has being rediscovered by new audiences.
The world changes. I just got an email today from HarperCollins saying that HarperCollins India has decided to publish it.
Cool.
A gay YA novel in India.
Oh, that's good. That's progress.
Definitely progress.
The only place I haven't been able to get it is in Russia.
That's not happening.
That's probably okay.
Well, it's
That's
weird.
fine.
I had it through. Well, anyway, I had somebody contact me, an editor in Russia, saying they wanted to do it. But when I wrote him directly to his Russian email address, the response I got was very clearly one of absolute fear. And he's like, "I don't know why you were writing to me. We would never publish this sort of thing in Russia." And I was like, "Oh, okay, well."
Yeah, and then a day later, he got thrown off the roof of his
Yeah.
high-rise, probably. Oh,
Yeah.
my God.
Exactly.
Well, I have, we just put out Unspeakable Horror 3, which Mike and Max are both in, repeat performance. This is the third in the Unspeakable Horror Anthology. And this one is a pretty direct response to what's going on in the world today with regard to LGBTQIA community. And, those of us that have lived long enough have always kind of seen that any time you gain rights and the pendulum swings one way, it always swings back. And right now we are unfortunately in this backwards kind of swing, particularly our trans brothers and sisters, and they're really, suffering right now. So this book was kind of in response to that. I have a short sonnet coming out in James Aquilone's wonderful Shakespeare Unleashed that I'm very excited about. And I did something I have never done in my adult life. I took a summer sabbatical from my job, and I am spending the entire summer working on my second novel. And I say that meaning that my first novel was in 2006. So I'm literally like the Donna Tartt of horror. At least that's the image I'm trying to cultivate by accident. So I'm doing that. And I also submitted my very first poetry collection. It's out, being considered by a publisher by invite right now. So we'll see where that goes. So all good things for all of us. And I'm happy that to see our other terrors contributors doing good things. So now I thought it would be kind of fun because people are always interested in horror writers and what they're reading and watching. What are you or what have you recently read that you would or are real excited about and would recommend? Anne, why don't we start with you?
I don't have it was on my Kindle, but Monstrilio by Gerardo Samano Cordova.
Okay.
I mean, particularly parents, pregnancy, I mean, it really touches on everything I'm interested in, Mike, is about sort of grief and loss, and very often about, addiction, stuff like that. But this is very much about grief, but it's also particularly grief as a parent. And it's a tiny book, gorgeous writing, very haunting. I thought it was stunning.
What was the name again? And I'm sorry.
Monstrilio.
Okay. I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, it's really a beautiful book.
Okay. Mike, how about you?
Well, I am Googling as we speak to try to find the name of this book because, as I said, COVID has ruined my memory. So I am really obsessed with people who create one really fantastic thing and then disappear. And either literally or just figuratively, they never do anything again. And so there is a woman named Connie Converse who is a musician, and she had one album, I don't know, a very long time ago. And then she got in her car and she drove away, and no one ever saw her again. And no one knows what happened to her.
Yes, I know this story.
Yeah, and so years later, somebody found the tapes that she had recorded, and they released the album, and she got a little more attention. And people tried to find her because she'd be about 80 now, and nobody could find her. And this one man became obsessed with this story, and he wrote a biography of her called "To Anyone Who Ever Asks: The Life, Music, and Mystery of Connie Converse," and the author is Howard Fishman. And I'm in the middle of that.
Wow, this is a recent book?
Yeah, it just came out a few weeks ago.
Oh, wow.
Well, a few weeks, May 2nd, it came out, according to the bookstore that shall not be named. But he really became obsessed with her, and he tracked down her brother, and he tracked down anyone who ever knew her. And there's not a lot to say about her, right? Because she disappeared. So the book is also a biography of how he wrote the book. And so he talks a lot about himself and the process of putting this book together and why, and how surprised he was at how uninterested in her story so many of the people from her own life were. They were just like, well, yeah, she was really good, and she did this really great album, and I guess she disappeared, and I wonder what happened to her. It's like, what? How can you not be? He's like, how can you not be as obsessed with this story as I am?
Yeah.
And what really interests me about her is she's basically Eleanor from Shirley Jackson's Haunting of Hill House. She is somebody who wanted to feel important, and she was somebody who wanted to feel a connection, and the people around her didn't get it at all. And her music is extremely weird when you start listening to it. It's very queer, and there's a lot of speculation about maybe that's what it was about. So yeah, I'm kind of obsessed with this book right now.
Without giving anything away, did he make any inroads in finding out what happened to her at all?
No.
Oh.
She literally got in her car. She left a note for her family that just said, "I'm going away."
Wow.
And that's the last anyone's ever heard of her.
That would make a great material for like a fictionalized version of whatever happened to her life. Interesting.
Yeah, well, it's bizarre because my next book for Harper that I was working on before I even read this book is about a boy who goes in search of his mother, who just up and disappeared after leaving him this one thing.
Was her name Connie?
It is now.
That's awesome. I can't wait to order that tomorrow. Max, what are you reading, or what have you read recently that really
So
good?
I grabbed this book at ReaderCon, and I finished half of it on my flight, my delayed flight, and we'll get to that home.
Oh, delayed flights. Oh, we have delayed flights.
It's called Green Thumb by Tom Cardamone, and it actually won the Lambda Award in 2013. It is a homoerotic novella about three boys who travel in post-apocalyptic Florida, and it's really interesting because I don't know if when he was writing it then he was thinking about what the world would be like, but like you think about Florida, you think about everything that's going on now, and it's like the way the prose is beautiful. The story, it's as a gay man, like I can see how it's I can relate to a lot of the feelings some of these characters are having as they're traveling through this this like desolate wasteland that is Florida, sunken underwater, and and it's just it feels very relevant nowadays. Obviously, written over 10 years ago, but Green Thumb by Tom Cardamone. So it's a really interesting book.
He's going to love to hear that. Tom is actually, I didn't realize you were reading that. He's actually a very good friend of mine. And if you like that, he has a wonderful, Mike might remember this, he has a wonderful short story collection called Pumpkin Teeth. I think that came out before Green Thumb, maybe after, I'm not sure. But that's also, if you really like Tom's writing. And Tom was also, he has a great story called Halloween Party in Unspeakable Horror 2, Abominations of Desire. Nice shout out for Tom. Wow, that was a good pick, Max. Jonathan, what are you reading? Or have you read recently?
Some of the stuff that knocked me out recently, Connor Habib's Hawk Mountain, Samantha Schweblin, who I just recommend to anyone. That was a collection of stories called Seven Empty Houses. But her novel Fever Dream is exceptional. Cassandra Khaw, I really appreciate the hell out of With the Salt Grows Heavy. It was a book I didn't get into at first, but I knew there was something special about the quality of the writing, and I pushed through, and man, am I glad I did, because it's phenomenal. And shouts to Josh Mallerman, who I think works at the height of his powers in the short form. I got to read Spin a Black Yarn, which is, I don't think it's out yet. It's coming soon, and it's phenomenal.
Yeah, I would agree with you on Josh in the short form. I loved what he did with Goblin.
It's so good.
Yeah, it really is. I hope he continues to world build using that whole world. That's awesome.
Yes, you might see a return.
Annie, how about you?
I'm gonna pick two because I can't choose.
All right, we have time.
So,
two is good.
Cool. So Just Like Home by Sarah Gailey. Okay. I love that book so much. I've recommended it to so many people in real life. I just thought it was so creepy and unnerving and just exquisitely written. I love that one. I think it's a slam dunk. And then in a different vibe, I loved Such Sharp Teeth by Rachel Harrison. Yeah. I love everything I've read by her so far. I've read all of her novels except for the one that's either just out or just coming out. I think it's not out yet. But Such Sharp Teeth in particular was such a great balance for me of like fun and fast and enjoyable, but also still meaningful. Like it like shows us female rage in a way that we never get to see in like a healthy way on the page. And I was just really delighted by that one.
Two good picks. Excellent. I have recently been reading a lot of thrillers. I'm trying to read a little widely in the sense that I'm trying to work on my pacing with my own writing. And I think reading thrillers is a really good way to kind of get that rhythm going. And I just finished, and I think it's going to be the book of the year, S.A. Cosby's All the Sinners Bleed. I love the first two books, but this one, he blows it all away with this. It is such a great book, great characters. I was in tears by the end. The pacing is breakneck. I mean, I was breathless the whole time. It's a great mystery. It's a police procedural. It's a family drama. It's everything you could want in a book. So I highly recommend Sean's can I see it on the screen? All the Sinners Bleed.
I need to go get that right now. I do love a good thriller to pick up the pace of my life, in what I'm doing, everything.
It really does work, right?
It does. And his characters feel so lived in. That's what impressed me so much about that very short story, Another Terrors, is you felt like you knew all of them. You felt like they had enough story to get it along. But it's so short. But I love his character work.
Yeah, you'll definitely enjoy this book. Did you read the other two?
I read the first one.
Okay, Blacktop Wasteland.
Yes.
Razorblade Tears was really good too. That was an excellent book. All right, so we have a little more time, so let's go around. We'll start with Max. Tell everyone who's watching where they can find you, if you have a website, or where they could find you on social media.
You can find me on Instagram at CyberGodWrites whenever I post, but or on my website, thewellsoftheweird.com. I didn't think about that name when I made the website, but that's okay. So yeah,
The Wells of the Weird. I like that. That works. Anne?
It's either Ann Davila Cardinal or Ann D Cardinal, depending on what. Instagram, the Bird app, the new one, Facebook. I'm on TikTok, though I am not great about it, but Book Talk is a very interesting place. But I'm on all social media. I love connecting with people, so find me.
Nice. Mike?
My website is michaelthomasford.com, and I think there are links to the other things. Instagram is, I don't know, author MT Ford, whatever they saddled me with 100 years ago. So yeah.
Jonathan?
I don't even know anymore. I think I'm on all of them. It's so bad. I just joined Blue Sky and Threads, and I'm like, what am I doing here?
I'm warning everybody, he's very selective with who he friends. I witnessed it in person. Just saying.
I was joking when I told her no, but
of you.
Okay. Actually, it's JONNOTHIN. That's John Nothing at Instagram and Twitter. Thank you, Vince.
Excellent. Annie?
I'm Annie Neugebauer everywhere. I don't use most of them very much anymore, except for Instagram. Occasionally, I'll pop on Facebook to just check if anybody's been talking to me. But if anybody wants to go find all my old work and all the stuff I've got lots of things that are free. My website is annieneugebauer.com, and I've got all of that sort of on my front page now. So
excellent. And I'm www.vincelagano.com, and all my socials are on there. Spend most of the time on Facebook and Instagram. The Twitter is just kind of like the publisher says, hey, you should really be on Twitter. I just don't have the energy for all the new crap, blue skies and free birds and all this other stuff. And I'm too old for the TikTok. I don't get it. Sorry. All right, where are we? Oh, we have 7 minutes left. All right, so we're going to go to the bonus question. And I hope nobody has any question. I hope nobody has anything for this.
Oh, Jesus.
But ask the editor anything.
Oh, I got a good one.
You do? All right, go ahead.
The pure venom that came out of your mouth. Vince, no, I just want to know from when you were tackling all the stories that are coming in the book, people just expect the best get in, but as someone who's programmed film for so long, for screenings, that's not always the case. There's plenty that I reject that are great. What made you land on the final stories? And I'm not looking for verification here. It's just, I really want to know your thought process when putting everything together.
It's going to sound cliche, but putting an anthology together is really like a museum curator. You're trying to put together a cohesive exhibit, and you're trying to get all of these pieces that kind of match the theme of the exhibit. So for us, I think when we were putting them together, obviously we didn't want subject matter to repeat. So if we had, let's say, not that we had a lot of stories about pterodactyls, but, Haley Piper's was the pterodactyl story. If we had 3 others, we kind of settled on one. We did try to look for a certain amount of stories and poetry that had a really nice flow to the language, because we really felt that the whole anthology as a whole should kind of have a nice flow. We had kind of a water theme almost in mind for this. I know it sounds crazy, but when you're picturing these things in your mind, how the stories kind of flow through the anthology. So we were looking for, again, I would say mainly just that the subject matter didn't repeat. There were, I'm trying to think if there was something where we had more than one. Well, besides the science fiction reject anthology, we did have one or two or even three stories that were set in a prison. I remember that. There was something about prisons. So we were kind of like, consciously looking at those types of things. But you're really, it's a hard process to describe because it's hard to just, articulate tone and atmosphere. But we were really looking for something that just flowed naturally and had this kind of ominous sense of other. And we really were very adamant about exploring not just the other in the traditional sense of horror, but how we could subvert that idea of other and, kind of show people that there were others. And we were happy. Some of the reviews, I think it was the LA Review of Books, actually pointed that out, that there was different aspects of otherness that they weren't expecting when they read the anthology. That wasn't a bad question. Thank you. Anything else to ask the editor? Good. Thank you.
Brian.
See, I'm glad nobody did their homework. I sent this email.
But there's
No,
one
Brian.
Here,
Brian Matthews.
hold up the book you recently read. I'm the only damn one who holds up the book. People, you didn't do your homework. All right.
Brian just asked a question in the chat.
You what?
Vince, does your acceptance rate increase with geographical proximity to the author?
Only for you, Brian. Only for you. And Brian, I listened to your damn advice. I had the speech written and I didn't win. So no more speech writing. Your advice sucked. I'm sorry. But anyway, so 1 year anniversary of Other Terrors. So I hope people will go out and buy it. I hope we have had at least 50 people who have donated $45 or more for the HWA's Halloween in July fundraising campaign, which benefits all of our wonderful scholarships. We do not have any inside scoop on what the next anthology will be, unless the executive director happens to know something.
I know nothing.
He knows nothing.
Oh,
okay?
Come on.
But there will be, because we have a publications committee in the HWA, and I'm sure they're hard at work pitching anthologies to Alec. And when those submission calls come, I think everybody on the panel and all of the contributors, especially those who got in through our open call, would agree. Take the chance, submit. You have nothing to lose.
Absolutely.
All right. I want to write the damn speech. Nope, no more damn speeches, Brian. I'm not writing them. I got to write the novel, Brian. No more speeches.
Exactly.
But I do want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight. We did this on very short notice, and I really thank everybody for their time. And please, again, the book is Other Terrors. Please go out and support the HWA. The better the sales for these anthologies that the HWA puts out, the easier it is to get contracts to do more anthologies, and you'll have more opportunities. One thing I did want to point out, since I have 2 minutes, one of the things that Rena and I were most proud about with this book, anthologies sell because you have names attached to them. As much as we want to think it's all about the talent and the quality of the stories, they want to see New York Times best-selling writers on the covers of these books. So we, invited authors are something we have to do. Most of the other HWA anthologies had a limited number of spots. We were given 5. And by working with our word count, Rena and I were able to double that. And we had 10 HWA members, some of whom had never had a professional sale, land in Other Terrors. So there are opportunities. You just have to take advantage of them. All right. So on behalf of the Other Terrors, happy anniversary to us. And hopefully Angela will pop back on and cut us off, so I will stop talking and rambling.
There are 49 more books available.
We did really good. Excellent. Come on, people. Angela.